For me, the biggest hurdle to writing a novel is time. I don't have much of it, and I know I'm not alone. Many of us wanting to write a book have to fit it in somewhere between work, family, chores, exercise, more chores, and other commitments. Oh, and reading. Just because we want to write a novel doesn't now mean we have to sacrifice reading them. At least I hope not. So when it came to me outlining my novel, I needed an outlining practice that was approachable and that allowed for some procrastination. Again, I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling that I have to be so on top of other things in my life that outlining my novel had to be a place where I could take the pressure off. And yes, you heard me, invite some form of procrastination. Let me explain. If you watched my preptober video, you would have seen how I found an old book that I used to first write a word, phrase, or any idea that I had about my novel. There was no structure to this part of my process. The whole purpose was to jot down anything and everything that came to mind regarding the idea that I had for my book. As you can see, it's not pretty, but in this phase of life, it feels like a huge win to get something down. And after a few days of this, I actually had something to work with. From there, I brainstormed chapter ideas. I was surprised how easily these flowed out of me. So on the surface, I'm on track, but I needed to get a lot deeper. I then worked through a series of questions that helped me identify how my characters were changing and growing throughout the story. I then plotted some of these important story beats on a graph, but I then noticed how my book was falling apart. So I introduced my first leg of procrastination and went to buy a new book as well as some markers. I purchased something with pages that are easily to rip out, and I'll explain why in a second. But on the off chance that you're wondering, I am keeping the old book and I will continue to run to it whenever I have thoughts or ideas about my novel. As I've been reflecting on what I've written and how the story's sort of shaping up now, I've had this idea for one of the chapters. It's chapter 3. So I'm going to go back to my old book and just write down whatever that comes to mind. I'm just going to write it down over here, and maybe I will bring it into this book at a later time, or maybe I'll just keep it here. We'll see when it comes to the actual part where I'm in front of the keyboard and I'm typing. I'm not quite sure how I will refer to it, but it's nice that I have options and that I have space to plop down any thoughts, no matter how formed or full it is. So at this point, I will revisit everything I did in my first book, and then I will rewrite it into the new book. I also try to beautify the experience with markers. I find that starting is the hardest part, and that fitting writing into my life is less scary when I already have something to work with. So when I move my thoughts and ideas over to my new book, I allow what I have already written down to take a new form. Something has really caught me by surprise, and I thought by merely taking the time out to move what I've written down in this old book to this new book, that my outline wouldn't be affected too much. I sort of was aware that I might get new ideas, but I didn't think that something so amazing would happen like what's happening right now. So I've just got all of the chapter ideas. So it's like a sentence that makes up the chapter. And I thought that's a broad enough overview for me to go into when it comes to sitting down and actually writing the novel. But what's interesting is, because there's no pressure and because I'm just really having a lot of fun, I've been able to look at my chapter ideas and notice that some of them don't actually need to be chapters anymore. They can sort of, the one idea can form part of the overarching chapter, I guess. But then I've also had these ideas that have come in terms of set pieces. And I didn't expect that to happen at all. So it's amazing how effortlessly these ideas are just coming to me, and how much more robust my outline is becoming without me even needing to or having put any pressure on it whatsoever. I found that I have more insight into my characters and themes, and I allow things to change should they need to. It's almost like I'm editing my story before I actually write it. I allow myself to see it, reimagine it, and I get to use a whole bunch of pretty colors. Can you believe some people would call this procrastination? So my outlining process is pretty loose, but it's incredibly approachable, and it's got me to the point where I am so ready to start writing. I'm not joking. I've already had parts of chapters that just needed to get onto paper, and luckily I have the old book to house everything like that. So an outline, for me at least, is about being rock solid about the big picture. It's so easy to lose the big picture if you're caught up in the details, and by revisiting the overarching idea of my story, I get inspired with ideas and set pieces that makes this experience a joy that I get to make time for.